It's not about the scoreline. It's about the structure. It's about the shape. It's about familiar patterns. It's about new names. It's about fitness. It's about trying to understand what this 2025-2026 Orlando Pirates side is going to be like. And it's about, as we look into, as Pirates enter into this new era under a new head coach, are there clues that we can already draw from a preseason friendly under the Spanish sun in Marbella? It is Talking Buccaneers with me, Fumani Msisinyani, and the way that I want to do in this episode is I want to talk about the lessons that I learned from Orlando Pirates' 2-0 defeat against Bolton Wanderers in a preseason friendly, the first of four that we're going to be watching over the course of something like 8 days. Orlando Pirates are in preseason in Marbella again. And yeah, we are watching them so as to learn what we can learn, right? Going into this new season. And already there are a few things that I learned that I want to talk about. Some aren't new things that I'm learning, but are things that I was particularly watching to see in this match. And I want to talk about these things. I think I have something like about 7 or so, maybe 8, and then I have various other points under these points. And yeah, let's get to it. The first thing that I was obviously looking at going into this match, now again, I've already mentioned that Orlando Pirates is under, a new head coach in Abdeslam Ouaddou, who's taking over from José Riveiro in what he calls, Abdeslam Ouaddou, a project of 5 years, which is right at the middle, at the end of the third year, and he's kind of taking over the veins. And something I wanted to see, particularly about him as a head coach, is whether or not he was gonna, whether he was gonna overhaul the squad or he was gonna keep the continuity in it. And I think already we've seen signs of a very, very, very mature head coach. I've heard Rulani speak of this very thing. And other coaches abroad speak about the fact that when you get to a club that has been successful, I mean, Pirates, we regard the last 3 years as somewhat successful in the sense that we wanted to close the gap. And if Pirates has looked at winning the league in the 5th year, then we've made some massive strides. And some of those have been like major point haul in the league. And when you go to that kind of club as a new head coach, I imagine that the first thing you don't want to do is to completely overhaul everything that has worked up to that point. And that's something that, was particularly impressive for me by this head coach, is that, he comes in and he doesn't completely tear up everything, rip everything apart. He kept the 4-2-3-1 that we've always known. And, even considering the signings that we've signed, I've always wanted to kind of check how is a head coach going to fit these new players into the system? Is he coming with a new system? Because we have a lot of midfielders. How is he going to play them? And the first thing is, you see the 4-2-3-1, you see the names that you've always seen, Sipombule and Nduli, and who else? I think the other person who might have started, who is a new signing, is Tsepang Moremi. In the starting 11 in the first half, is that he keeps that continuity, doesn't rip it up so much. And I think it's very mature from him. Already he can sort of familiarize with himself what was working, and then kind of, if there needs to be tinkering, then he will tinker from that point on. And I thought that was the first thing that was particularly impressive about this new era that we go into under this head coach. Now, the second thing which I want to talk about, which I picked up, is what I want to call the importance of a technical security. And what I mean by that, kind of going into the second half, like analyzing the game a little bit, I think Orlando Pirates was struggling in making inroads into the box. I think that's a fair thing to say, especially in the first half. Now, we dominated the game. I think on the balance of things, the first half was dominated by Orlando Pirates. Dominance in the sense of possession, right? Now, Bolton could have had the strategy to say, hey, we want to soak up, in every game that we play, we want to soak up the pressure, we want to cede possession to the opposition. And what we're good at when we assess our players, or maybe it's our philosophy as a club, this is how we want to play our football, is we want to kind of sit back, soak pressure, and then we'll sign players that are, maybe we'll sign only 2 players who are technically gifted, and then we'll sign a big man up front who's going to hold up the play for us, so that when we kind of go long onto the reference point who holds it up for us, everyone coming into him, if they're technical enough for those breaks, we will get results. And then we're going to prioritize saying, we're going to be compact, we're going to have shape, right? Now, Bolton, that could have been the strategy. So when I say Pirates dominated, I mean in the sense of possession, because Bolton did what Bolton does, and it did it well. Well, I assume they do that, but they did it well, the set pieces, the breaks, and all of that. Now, Pirates dominated possession. That's what Pirates dominated. That's what I mean when I say Pirates dominated. We dominated possession because that's how we want to play. So, in other words, because that's how we want to play, we did well in that regard. However, I think sort of coming back to my point about technical security, which is something I want to talk about, is that we struggle to make inroads into the box, part because of Bolton's structure and compactness, but I think it's part because of this as well. I think it's part because we need to get to a point where we've got to have the qualitative superiority of our technical sort of aspects of things. And I mean that you want to get to a point where technically the players are so good that you don't need overloads to dominate the ball, but rather you can trust that when you have Sipombule and Nduli in midfield and one other player in that space against 3 players, will keep the ball. And I think that's why Pirates signed Sipombule in the first place. So that's a step in the right direction. But I kept seeing that, the center was being overloaded, which is fine because it led to like all these diagonals, which I'll come in to talk about. Obviously, finding certain players in isolated spaces. However, I think if you get to a point where technically you are so secure in the middle of the park, knowing that even if we've got 2 men in there, they will retain the ball for us. What it does is then it frees up bodies to get into the box, which is another problem I want to get into, which I'm leading up to actually, is that, we had too many players kind of in that central zone, in the center space, when we kind of get into the final third, as we're trying to progress the play and create chances for ourselves, is that, we had all these players who are getting into or towards the ball and they're kind of touching it, but there's really no one who's threatening the box of Bolton. So Bolton is happy for us to have these beautiful flicks and people combining and that sort of thing, as long as they're just moving in reference to the ball and we're not getting the inroads into Witumele Radio Pane. They're more than happy for us to do that. And so this is kind of where I want to go. I want to talk about the fact that, and it particularly upsets me because we have released a player who I've always seen as the player who gave us that second option. Right, and I'll get to someone later on, Snotolo Kwaiba, who I think is a fantastic signing. But if you hang on just a little bit, we've released Saleng, and I think Saleng is the kind of player, but I don't want to talk about Saleng. So I expected Muremi to be the second player in the box, right? But often what you saw is we had 2 players out wide. Now, Shandu did invert at times, and they would interchange, especially on the right, they would interchange, whereas on the left, Mufugeng is always inside and Hot is the one who's maintaining the width. But they would interchange Shandu and Muremi. But I thought what I wanted to see is that if we've got that width on the right via, Shandu, and then on the left, we've got the width via Hoto, then you want Mufugeng to come in central. Now, he's good at combination play, but he's also good at box entries. But he's not your sit in the box and wait for chances. I thought we at least need to have a right winger who will do that for us. He's going to sniff out where to be and score, right? But however, we're too overloaded in the midfield. And I think, it kind of, led us to dominating the ball and doing these kind of things, but Boitumelo Radiopane was so lonely as a striker. He wasn't getting anything, and I think that might lead to people unfairly kind of saying Boitumelo Radiopane did nothing in this game. I think it's a lonely thing to be an Orlando Pirates striker. I think Zakhele Elpasa knows, Makgopa knows, Tshegofatso Mabasa knows. You often have to drift to get into the game. But the test for someone like Radiopane, this is my thing about Boitumelo Radiopane, is that if you guys haven't noticed, the third thing that I learned is that we lack a box threat, by the way. So I'm not very structured about doing this. I'm trying out the whole thing of keeping notes. But this is what Boitumelo Radiopane should learn or will have learned, especially in this game. It's a very lonely thing to be a Pirates striker because all the players are kind of getting involved in trying to progress the ball to you, but you're the only person there. And so often is that, it's hard to even find you when you are there because you are up against all these 4 defenders. And the test for him is this: when you get one chance, will you score it? And I think that's why we need a clinical finisher. We need a very good number 9, which we do have in Tshegofatso Mabasa. But I do think that Pirates need to prioritize kind of trusting that we are secure with fewer players in deeper positions, and then committing bodies to get in the box so that we have numbers when we try and create those chances in order to finish them. And I think that was the sort of theme of the first half. I think for me, it showed me that, we need to be more brave in that regard, but we also need to be brave in committing people forward, and we need to kind of become more of a box threat. So much is wonderful about watching our players try and create a chance and combine and do all those things. But when we don't finish them, it's all too vain because Bolton will walk around with a worthless score line. I mean, it's a preseason friendly, but you don't want those kind of things happening when the season has now commenced, where you're losing those kind of games that you are dominating. When you come up against these teams that are playing for one chance and they take it in a set piece. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, I already touched on it, is Snotolo Kwaiba, because I think he's specifically coming for that duty. Now, I was kind of not for the Kwaiba signing, but having thought about it, the kind of player Kwaiba is, he reminds me a lot of Thomas Muller. I'm not saying he's like Thomas Muller. I'm not saying his game is exactly like Thomas Muller's. I'm saying he reminds me of Thomas Muller. How? In this way. I think, there are these players who are midfielders, but their specialty is sniffing out when to get in the box and score. And I think at Orlando Pirates, we've not had that for a while. I can't think of the last player we had who was a number 10 who scores goals. And I think specifically because, especially in the first half, you saw Tito kind of drifting a lot. Tito will like to make those runs to stretch the opposition vertically and horizontally, and create spaces everywhere, people kind of following him. But what he doesn't do is he doesn't get into the box and supplement the striker in terms of scoring. And I think that's where Kwaiba, as an option at Orlando Pirates, I love him. However, obviously we saw with Kwaiba, he was played out of position, which was, a massive problem in the second half because there was this overhaul of the lineup, understandably, for fitness reasons. However, we lacked a structure. We played without a recognizable right winger for one, which meant that Kwaiba, who was playing as sort of like a right central midfielder, had to cover that side. And the responsibility was shared between him and we were playing with 2 strikers, Makgopa and Mabasa. Mabasa had to be the one Makgopa had to be the one who would also have to drift to the right to kind of cover that right wing, especially in defensive situations. But it kind of left Tshepo Mashilwane a bit exposed because they often look at each other. Who's supposed to go and cover Mashilwane? But Kwaiba was played out of position, but I saw a bright spark in him. He wants the ball. He gets onto it. He requests for it. And I think that is in contrast with, the fourth thing that I learned, or maybe this is the fifth thing, because Kwaiba is the fourth thing that I learned, is that he's actually a good signing for us. But the fifth thing in contrast with that is Masindi Nemtajera. Now, again, granted, this is just a preseason friendly. Masindi Nemtajera will probably grow into his role, or we hope that he will grow into his role. But that's what we hoped for last season with Selailo Rasibouja, is that you thought, okay, it's preseason. I remember specifically saying these words. It's just the first game of preseason. Selailo Rasibouja seems like he's good on the ball, seems like he's a very good player. He's going to grow into it. Now, again, granted, he's been hampered by injury, but you never quite saw that. Some people said the same thing about Siphelelo Baloni, and you never quite saw that. My point is this: maybe we need to see it in preseason. Maybe we need to start seeing it. We need to see the glimpse. If we don't see it, it's very reasonable for us to assume that we might not. And I think with Masindi Nemtajera, I have grace again, like I did with Baloni, like I did with Musele, like I did with Silailo Rasibuja, like I did with Ntsako Makhubela, like I did with Ndabaithetho Ndlondo. I have grace again with Masindi Nemtajera. But the signs, what I saw from today, Nemtajera doesn't have the courage to call for the ball in midfield. I think in that second half where Sipho Mbule, who was doing it in the first half, who was the conductor, was the orchestrator, or maybe Nduli was the conductor, but Sipho Mbule was the orchestrator. Those names sound very similar. Sipho Mbule was the orchestrator, and he was more of the kind of the one who you knew was going to get away from a press here and there, and he was going to combine with the offensive players. Where Nduli, midfield general, is just going to keep it tidy. He's just going to recycle possession for us. He's going to win the ball back for us. And he did all of those things, and he showed us that he's a signing that we didn't know we needed. But with Makhetlin Makala, again, still aging, and now he's injured. Doubts again a little bit about Talent Mbata. Maybe, he's having a patch where he's off form. Nduli, he brings this calming presence in midfield, and he wins the ball back. And, he plays it, and he's got the energy as well, and he knows how to burst into like space and that sort of thing, which is kind of like what Talent Mbata does. But you feel like Nduli is more responsible, even with his advanced age. And he's a bit of a leader as well. At Stellenbosch before he leaves them and he comes to us. And so back to Masindi Nemtajera, with Sipho Mbule now off and Silepe kind of playing that Nduli role. You expected that, Masindi Nemtajera, who was the third person in that midfield, I already mentioned Silepe was kind of the one who was the sitter now. And then, you had Kwaiba, and then you had Nemtajera, who was supposed to be our playmaker. And, he didn't show for the ball enough. The other thing is that when he did get the ball, I remember specifically a moment in which he's very irresponsible with it and he loses it. Now, obviously, there weren't a lot of people showing for the ball in the second half. For those of you guys who would have watched, a lot of it felt like a very fragmented or disintegrated Pirate side, where everyone was kind of standing in their position, not knowing, am I supposed to go and get the ball, or are you supposed to get the ball? It was that kind of chaos going on for us. And I think Masindi Nemtajera is supposed to be the one then to say, okay, come, give the ball to me, and I'm going to let us dominate Bolton again. In fact, we saw Bolton start to dominate possession in the second half, which was like, okay, this is something that in preseason we can go, it's fine. But, and because players are not fit and that sort of thing. But the second team of Pirates, that's not really the second team, but you do imagine that the first lineup in the first half is going to be similar to what we're going to see throughout the season. And what we saw in the second half is going to be, with exception to maybe someone like Tsogfatso Mabasa, who might start those games. But and maybe Ozuna Paulus will eventually find himself to the right, because Relay is obviously going to play on the left. But I think we saw more of like what we'd see throughout the season in the first half. In the second half, we saw somewhat what we'd call the second team. But I do expect for the second team to be a bit stronger. I don't expect to see a lot of that disintegration. And the reason why I point that out is because we didn't see a disintegration in the first half, which is a team which is also in preseason. So there's no preseason excuse for the second team, right? It just says that the quality on show was a bit lesser, right? There was no longer like this cohesion that we kind of saw in the first half with smart players like Mbule, Fugeng, Maswanganyi, and those kind of guys. So I really think that people like Masindi Nemtajera is going to have to step up. Already I've made a video on this channel kind of saying what are my fears around him, that he might go similar trajectory to someone like Ndlondo. We've seen that a lot at Pirates. And that for me is said as a warning, not as a kind of discouraging the player. Is to say you actually need to step up. When you get to Pirates, you need to take it a notch higher. It's not good enough to be good at Marumo Gallants. That reputation will not sustain you at Pirates. You then need to make a reputation as a Pirates player, which is to step up, because the expectations are even more now. It's like everything you've done before has gotten you to this starting point now. Now you are starting again. And for Nduli, you quickly get forgotten if you hide in games, even if they're preseason. And I'm pointing that out for that very reason, because I've had, a lot of criticism for the video that I made about Nduli, which was a warning and what he should learn from Ndlondlo. And I'm stressing the point again, which I saw is that, he's coming in as a playmaker, and a playmaker needs to make play, and he needs to make the team play, right? And I think he didn't show for the ball enough. Instead, we saw Kwaiba, who I didn't think is coming to Pirates for that role. Kwaiba is coming to Pirates to be an auxiliary striker for Orlando Pirates. And therefore, you need Masindi Nduli to have the guts and take the ball and pass the ball. Take the ball, pass the ball again. And I thought he didn't show enough around that. And I've already touched on the 6th point that I learned already, but it was the fact that, we didn't have shape in the second half. And granted, we didn't have all our players, but we kind of played with this like very asymmetric formation. Again, I already said that, we had the striker kind of going into the right wing. We had people playing out of possession. And maybe it overexposed Mashilwane, but he dealt with it quite okay. I wasn't quite impressed with, Mashilwane and Ndaba. And again, I'm going to give them the preseason excuse, because we're going to give everything that is not impressive the preseason excuse for now. But come MTN 8 quarterfinal, I don't think we'll see Mashilwane. But if we do, I'm gonna expect better, because the Pirates right back is supposed to be a very good player. Gone are the days where the right back is just, someone who's just makeshift and he's just there to cover the position. But you need someone who's going to have that tactical awareness, who's going to have the technical ability as well. But on top of that, he has to be very good at defending, and which was the problem with, for example, Thabiso Munyane. But Thabiso Munyane, you then go forward as well, is that his quality delivery, his quality in delivery is not there as well. So I'm trying to say that for Tshepo Mashilwane, I beg your pardon, the stakes are high at right back. You don't go hiding as a right back at Pirates. You are actually like there's a magnifying glass on you. We want to see what you bring, and it's not enough to you just did quite all right. And I thought it was that with Ndaba, who is coming in to fill in for Marco again. And we've released 2 left backs. Innocent Maela is obviously retired, but Paseka Marco has been released. And we have gone and captured Ndaba at left back to deputize Dion Hotto, who is fantastic Hotto at what he does. And for Ndaba, again, just like Mashilwane, the magnifying glass is going to be on him. And I didn't quite see, but I think overall the shape and all of that was maybe adding to what were the struggles. But I think the main point within this is that you will see that I'm now outside, and yeah, so much noise, so I'm maybe going to move this side. I am now outside because we've had a power outage. In fact, the noise that you are hearing are generators around the area that I stay in. But the reason I'm now doing this outside, like I said, is power outage. And, after everything I've said in the video, I didn't want to forfeit all of that and start again. So the last thing I remember that I needed to say, the last point, was this. And the point that I was making, I beg your pardon, the point that I was making, sorry guys, the point that I was making was something about the second team having to have better cohesion and having to step up more. Because I know many of the players that played in the second half will know that they are part of the second team. And yeah, but the last point I wanted to make is in fact I have 2 points. The first one is about set pieces. I think there's not a lot for me to dissect and analyze, but I think Pirates will have to take that not as something to kind of, I know they won't, but I know we can kind of just think, oh no, it's just set pieces, they happen. But yeah, some teams, they benefit off of disorganization. If you're disorganized, some teams play for that, and you can lose so many points during the course of a season because of set pieces. And I think that's something that Pirates will have to kind of look into. But the last one was just hearing Sipho Shane's voice throughout the game. he was the one who was barking instructions at everyone. He was controlling everyone's position, telling everyone where to be, and that sort of thing. And I thought that was something that, I thought was very impressive to see, or to hear rather. Just speaking to Lebogile Mofokeng, calling that player, saying, Emma Khanyane, Khulka Khanyane, Emma Mo, those kind of things, those kind of instructions. I have an article that I've written recently about Tim, and I think that's the kind of thing that Tim used to do for us. When you would hear him, you'd hear him barking instructions at people. And Sipho Shane, I think it's impressive in obviously this transition phase again in terms of, the captain with Marbella having gone now. And Da has been out for a long time. Oki is kind of like, he's regressed in the team. And so Shane obviously has always kind of been a leader, even the way he speaks in certain videos. But I think him kind of like me rather seeing that more, I think is impressive in terms of leadership going forward. And then what I want to say is this: we saw the game, we lost, but it's not about the score. It's more about the signs, right? We saw the bad stuff and we saw the good things, but it's all just the beginning. Anyway, let me leave it here. Up the mighty Bucks. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video from Talking Buccaneers. If you did, please hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with all our future content.